Factors influencing success in foreign language learning. If you are studying a foreign language or thinking about embarking upon the study of a foreign language, you should be aware of the factors that are going to affect what you can achieve because they're going to affect you, and because perhaps you can change some of them so that you can achieve more. So, in order to discuss this topic, the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we clearly understand an important distinction between language acquisition on the one hand and language learning on the other hand. These are two very different processes that are all too often conflated, wrongly conflated in my opinion. So what are they? Language acquisition is a natural process. Language acquisition is what happens when we just pick up a language from the surrounding environment. We hear a language being spoken around us, and after a time, we come to speak it too. This is very much a childhood process, a normal, natural childhood process. This is how all human beings come to speak or come to talk the languages that are spoken around them. These are what we call our first languages, or our native languages, or our mother tongues, our home languages. And likewise, that's in early childhood. A little bit later, when we start going to school, some people in multilingual situations get a second language or a school language, an educational language that is different from the language spoken at home. And this is obviously reinforced by being taught, but it's still mainly just being used around children who are still very much growing up. And so language acquisition is mainly at play there as well. So as children, we learn any individual languages that we might be learning. All individual languages are reflections of a larger phenomenon called language with a capital L. And by that I mean the basic human phenomenon by which we ascribe specific and particular meanings to specific and particular sounds, and then we string these specific sounds together by specific and particular laws, grammatical laws, that enable us to express not just our basic needs and wants, but actually highly complex and abstract thoughts. So this larger phenomenon of language is just mirrored in all the specific individual human languages, and this is what we are acquiring. And as children, we do this. Success is the rule. All human beings do acquire the languages that are spoken around them as they grow up, unless you have some sort of handicap, physical, or unfortunately come from terribly abusive unfavorable circumstances that inhibit the natural process of acquisition. So I make an analogy that learning how to talk is like learning to walk. On the other hand, language learning is different. It's not a natural process, it's a conscious process. It acquires real application because it involves study, it involves instruction, and therefore it's something that is more of an adulthood phenomenon. You can start it in late childhood or adolescence, but this is mainly something that adults do, and it's different from language acquisition because you've already acquired language with the capital L, and so language learning is always predicated upon your prior language acquisition experience. Whatever native language or languages you have are going to serve as a filter through which you see and perceive and learn the other language, the foreign language. It's going to affect the way you hear it, the way you pronounce it, the way you understand it. So we only learn language once, and then we can go on learning other languages. And maybe because of this, success, unfortunately, is not the rule in language learning. Therefore, I liken it, learning a foreign language is not like learning how to walk, but rather it's like learning how to play a musical instrument. So I think it's important not to conflate these because they are fundamentally different. And so why then do people conflate them? I think often it's done with very good intentions. People want to encourage people to learn foreign languages. And so they say things like, oh look, you learned your native language, you acquired your native language, you can learn this language, you can learn this. You see this very much in the marketing of language learning products. It often says something very specific just like that. You will acquire this language just the way you acquired your mother tongue, effortlessly, easily, smoothly. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. As I said, language acquisition works very well in childhood. I suppose the issue of adult language acquisition might be very interesting in sociolinguistics, historical sociolinguistics, because indubitably there have been billions upon billions of human beings throughout history who have just been thrown into a new language environment and not had any opportunity to study it and have just had to sink or swim, acquire it. And perhaps some people, under some circumstances, might be able to do this. Pre-literate people might have more of an ability to do this. But if you look around at immigrant communities and other places like that, the results of what happened as adults are usually, they're not the same as what happens with children. Children learn how to speak the language that they acquire. They learn it well. Adults don't. The result is usually a broken, bastardized form of language, what we call a pidgin language, that might be useful, able to communicate those basic needs and wants, but it's not a vehicle for expressing any kind of more complex thoughts. It's just not very pretty to listen to. So I think, methodologically speaking, the endeavor to make language learning be as much like language acquisition is heading in the wrong direction. In my experience, the key to success in language learning is not in trying to make it be as much like language acquisition as possible, but in actually making it be as conscious as possible, because it's fundamentally a conscious process. I also think it's wrong to try to equate these two different processes, because it kind of downplays the achievement of learning a foreign language. Language acquisition, because it's a normal, natural process, there's really no merit to it. If you speak Chinese because you're Chinese, well, that's normal. A billion other people can do that. But if you come to learn to speak Chinese and you're not Chinese, you're American or something like that, that is a real achievement. And I think that deserves recognition. And if you try to equate the two, that really gets downplayed. So, understanding these differences is an important thing to do, and that enables us to move on to talk about the success and failure rates in foreign language learning. Learning a foreign language, it doesn't have to be an arduous process, and there are circumstances and places where it happens relatively well. And perhaps one person listening to this, you might be fortunate enough to come from that environment, and so you might not know firsthand that learning a language swiftly, easily, and well, unfortunately, is not the general rule. More often, people struggle for a long time to learn a foreign language, and in the end, they're not happy with the results of what they achieve. And unfortunately, even more unfortunately, I think it's more often the general rule that people study for a long time and get nowhere at all. Now, if you don't happen to know somebody who can tell you something like, I studied this language for years and years and I'm not able to say anything in it, just to confirm what I'm saying, I invite you to go and look, for instance, at some things like school attrition rates. Look at any language program, and you'll see the number of beginning students is always much higher than the number of students who continue to the next higher and the next higher and the next higher level. Go to any library or bookstore and look at the publications. The number of beginning manuals is much higher than the number of any more advanced ones. Most people just don't get anywhere with it. So why is that? Learning how to learn a language is a skill that you can learn in itself, and once you learn it, it gets easier and easier. But if you haven't done it before, then I think, statistically speaking, the odds are stacked against you when you first set out to do it. So how can you improve your statistical odds? That's the purpose of this video. I think by understanding the factors that will influence your success. So there are lots and lots of factors. We could just start to enumerate them and talk about them one by one, but I think it's more helpful to categorize them And I can think of a basic bifurcation, two fundamentally different types of factors. On the one hand, there are immutable factors, and on the other hand, there are mutable factors. The immutable factors, what do I mean by that? I mean factors, they're not necessarily things that you cannot change at all, but they're things that if you can change them, or if they simply change by themselves over time, this is going to be a slow process. Even if you're aware of them, it's not something that you can change overnight. You might be able to work at some of these things, but it's going to take time. And what are these immutable factors? I can think of 9 of them. The first thing that people always ask when you wonder about people who succeed at learning a foreign language is whether there's a question of talent or gift. And I put on the same line with that after a /aptitude, because I think that's what we really need to talk about more often. Talent or gift or aptitude for learning languages. Well, I believe that existentially speaking, we human beings, we're all in the same exact situation, and we should all have the same basic fundamental human rights. But I also think that while the differences between us might not be perceptible at all, either from a macroscopic or a microscopic perspective, from within our own anthropocentric perspective, we're not all the same. Some people are better at doing some things than other people. Some people have an eye for color and detail and are cut out to be artists. Some people are naturally graceful and balanced and coordinated, and they're cut out to be athletes. Some people have a real ear for melody and rhythm, and they're cut out to be musicians. And so certainly some people have more of an inclination or a disposition to succeed in learning foreign languages. But a real talent or gift, what might that be? I've never met anybody that has anything like that. I don't believe I have anything like that. The only thing I can conceive of would be what we just talked about, the difference between language acquisition and language learning. Perhaps you could retain a high degree of language acquisition throughout your life. This could play out in various ways. On a phonological level, there are about 200 different phonemes that can be actualized in the various human languages, and yet most languages only use about 50 of them. And so what happens to our ears as we grow up? We lose the ability to really hear and perceive those other 150, and when they are present in a foreign language that we want to learn, we have to struggle, approximate with them, learn how to try to hear them again. Perhaps somebody with real talent or gift wouldn't have to struggle that way. They would be able to mime and mimic perfectly any sound that they heard, not have the rhythm of their native language be in the background when they spoke a foreign language. But I think that if that's out there, that's very rare. And I think that, again, to use the analogy of music, I think perhaps if you wanted to become something like a world-renowned recognized name as a solo instrumentalist, perhaps you need something like talent or gift. But I think that if you go around to, for instance, the first violinists of the world, of the symphony orchestras around the world, and took a survey of them, I doubt that many of them would say they got there because of talent or gift. They would say they got there because of passion and practice. But they clearly also got there because they had some sort of aptitude to be cut out to be musicians in the first place. And so I think that if you want to make some sort of a career out of languages, become an interpreter or a translator or a teacher or a linguist or a polyglot or anything like that, you should have some basic aptitude. You should love words. You should like studying. If you have these kind of things, you can do more of this. But I think that you need to keep this in perspective. These are innate, inborn traits. You either have them or not, and you might not discover them until later on in life, but I don't think you can develop these things. But if you are more of a normal human being and you don't necessarily want to make a career out of languages, you just want to learn one foreign language, it's become important to you to do that, I don't think you need to have even any particular aptitude in order to do that. It's important we just talked about the fact some people are coordinated, some people are uncoordinated and clumsy. If you're that way, you shouldn't try to be an athlete. And if you're tone deaf, you shouldn't try to be a musician. You might also, if you're really tone deaf, you might have a hard time with languages, so you shouldn't force somebody like that to do it. But if you just want to learn a language, I think it's more important that you have some of these other factors going for you. So the second factor that's relatively immutable is your intelligence. Your IQ might be something that I don't know, you could improve your actual IQ test score by studying for it, retaking the test. Perhaps there are some miracle foods, spirulina or some special kind of green tea that might make you smarter. Certainly, I think when you're raising your children, if you stimulate them in various ways, stimulate their minds, they might develop a bit more intelligence. But this too, I think, is basically inborn, ingrained. You're either bright and sharp or you're a bit more dull. So I think rather than wondering whether we can increase our intelligence, we need to think about just making sure that whatever degree of intelligence we have is maintained in good condition. And use the analogy here of mental fitness to physical fitness. And I don't look around the world and see many people so aware of that and practicing that. So just as you need to physically work out to keep your intelligence sharp, I think you need to work out your mind in various ways, and you need to take care of it. So let's start with that. I don't think that if you have a lot of what I can call basically bad habits, listening to me talk about this is going to change them in itself, just so you can learn languages more efficiently, but perhaps it'll act as a catalyst combined with other things. If you don't sleep properly, you don't sleep enough, you don't sleep with your right sleep rhythm, your mind is not going to be sharp. If you don't eat properly, question of a truly good diet, I don't want to go into that too much, but I certainly don't think it's what's commonly offered around us, pre-prepared, processed, genetically modified foods. If you eat this kind of thing, your mind is not going to be all that sharp. If you watch television, your mind is going to be dulled. Don't do that. There are things that you need to do to stimulate your mind to work it out. So I think this will introduce a chicken or egg type aspect to this, but you can look out there and find some reports or research indicating that actually learning a language is a good thing for your mind. It will ward off Alzheimer's later on in life, perhaps, and before you get to that that level, think about it. Learning a language makes you think about things from a new perspective, see things from a totally different light, and this helps your cognition and helps your awareness. So you do need a degree of intelligence to study languages, certainly, but also I think studying languages will help your state of intelligence, your mental fitness, stay in good condition. The third aspect, relatively immutable aspect, is the whole realm of memory first and foremost, which comes from your attention span and ability to focus. This too, like intelligence or talent itself, these can be aspects of talent or gift, but they're all basically innate or inborn, I think. If you meet somebody who has a truly photographic memory, I think probably they just always had it. I don't know that we can develop a photographic memory, but I think these are things that we can work at to perhaps a higher degree than our intelligence. If you really want to improve your memory, you can read up on it. There are techniques of mnemonics, building what we call a memory castle in your head and placing things in specific order and trying to remember them that way by chains of association. There are other ways of working at your memory, but when people come to me, students come to me and complain that they have a bad memory, I think the problem is not so much, usually it's not so much that they truly don't remember things, but that they never really noticed them in the first place, and so it's hard to remember. So if you are truly interested in improving your memory, I can recommend that you work on your attention span and your ability to focus. Certain things, habits that I see very common around me, multitasking, particularly when you're learning, be it doing various things on the computer at once or trying to study with loud rock type distracting music in the background or with the television playing in the background. I've met people who say they've always done that they need it in order for them to concentrate. I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. You need to have focus to begin with in order to get things into your memory. And here I can recommend one particular exercise if you're interested in that. That it's very slow, but I think if you do it every day for a year, you'll probably notice some differences. And that is to actually try to empty your mind entirely, to think about absolutely nothing, and not let any thoughts come into your head. And I think when you first try to do this, you'll find that within 5-10 seconds, your mind is all over the place. It's very hard to stay focused on nothing. So if you want to really practice this, it helps if you hold your breath and if you stare at a candle flame to remain focusing on something like that. But yes, if you do something like this kind of exercise first thing in the morning, every day for a year, after a year, I think your memory will probably be somewhat better because you'll train yourself to focus and pay attention more. Training, learning things, we usually do that in school. So an educational background is the next relatively immutable factor. Obviously your education does change the more you get, but that's slow and over time. You can aspire to it, hope for it. It's important to have a good education because this will give you more opportunities to learn languages and probably more of an understanding about why you would want to or like to. When you're learning, being given an education, something that can affect it, the next factor, relatively immutable, is whether you have some sort of a learning disorder. Certainly if you have a form of dyslexia or something, you're going to be more challenged at learning and achieving and learning a foreign language than otherwise. Conversely, there's more talk these days. I think too many conditions are labeled and that kind of thing, but there's a kind of form of autism called Asperger's syndrome that supposedly makes it easier to learn languages. So these kind of things can come into play. More pertinent, I think, immutable factor. Obviously your age is what it is. But your age or maturity level, these are going to influence or affect the way that you learn a foreign language. In the first place, I think that many people, when they first learn a foreign language, they don't choose to, they're made to do it in the course of their schooling, and they might be too immature to really follow the process through, and because they're forced to do it at this state, they will have a bad experience, they'll form bad attitudes about it, and then later on in life when they want to do it, this will come back and haunt them. On the other hand, many people, strangely many people to me, have the belief that age in itself is going to be a barrier to learning a foreign language. I've met people who've told me they think that they can't learn a language after they're 25 or after they're 40. I know lots of people, senior citizens, who are still learning foreign languages. Age in itself is not a barrier to learning a language, but it may affect the way that you do it, the type of approach you want to use. Certainly, most people only learn things while they're young and in school. And if you haven't learned anything in decades and then you try to learn a language or anything else, clearly that's going to be more of a challenge, more difficult. But actually if you keep learning your whole life, particularly if you keep learning languages, if you want to learn a language in old age, that's not an issue, except for the fact that it does take many years to master a language, and you probably don't have as many years ahead of you when you're older as when you're younger. The seventh relatively immutable factor is your personality. Your personality can change over time with various influences, but if you, in certain aspects, if your personality is shy, perhaps you can try to force yourself to be more outgoing, but in other aspects of your personality, if you're not curious or creative enough, it's hard to force yourself to do that. Personality, though, is important. It's a huge catch-all category. Certainly what we believe and our attitude towards something very much affects our ability to do it. If you think you can learn a language or do anything else, you probably have a much higher chance of succeeding than if you think you can't. If you think it's an impossible, hard task, you're probably not going to get anywhere with it. So just think about what your personality is like. This can affect how you learn a language. It's probably beneficial to have a classic type A personality. If you're a driven go-getter who wants to succeed at whatever you do, you'll probably succeed at learning a language, but this can also get in the way if you're too perfectionistic. If when you're learning a foreign language, you have to endure for a while not understanding everything, and if you demand immediate clarity, you're not going to get it. When you're learning a foreign language, you have to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes, and if you're so perfectionistic that you can't stand making mistakes, this will be an impediment. Type B personality is more relaxed, laid back. You're not necessarily going to study as well, but if this will help you to live with that ambiguity and learn from your mistakes, this can be beneficial as well. So your personality in learning a foreign language, it can change. A lot of people say that when they learn a foreign language, they actually take on a different identity or personality. That's not been my experience, but certainly, yes. I mean, when you are trying to learn a language, you need to go out and speak to people, and you need to force yourself to do that, and sometimes that takes on a life of its own. The way your personality is, this segues very much into the 8th factor, namely your learning style. Different learning styles, people who are involved in education certainly know about these, but I don't know how widely spread knowledge is of the fact that different people really learn in different ways. Some people have very analytical minds, and they learn quite well by having things explained logically, step by step, and then doing exercises based upon that. Other people learn best simply by imitating, by repetition. Other people learn best by doing, by figuring out things on their own. There are what is called kinesthetic learners who need to be in physical motion in order to learn something. They're all different kinds of learning styles. And if you don't know this, and you are presented with material that's in a learning style that's not yours, it's not suited to you, you're not going to learn very well. So you need to be aware that there are different styles and different approaches. In language learning, say one of the classic approaches of teaching grammar and translation, that's very suitable for people who have analytical minds. You would learn quite well in that fashion, but it's not suitable for other types of learners. And conversely, that's out of vogue now. What is in vogue is the communicative approach, task-based, lots of conversations and group-based work and learning practical functional language. That's not suitable for people with analytical styles. So being aware of different styles is an important thing to do. And finally, the 9th factor, relatively immutable, is experience. Experience builds up. Experience starts with your native language. That's going to color your foreign language learning experience, how different or similar it is. But then, by experience, I mean more than that. Experience, unfortunately, can be bad or negative and will affect your attitude and your ability to continue learning languages. But hopefully, by experience, what I mean is the build-up of knowledge and skill, know-how in learning languages, as I think I already mentioned, is something that it's a skill that can be taught or learned, and then it becomes a much easier process. So these are the 9 immutable factors, things that either you can't change or you can only change very slowly, but you need to be aware of. So let's move on now to the mutable factors. Mutable factors are factors that you can change or that can be changed instantly, very swiftly, overnight. If you are using certain materials and I give you different materials, you can use them right away. So what are these mutable factors? There are 3 main categories here. They all begin with M. They are materials, methods, and motivation. Materials. I have already made, years ago now, a whole series of reviews of different types of materials, different series of language learning manuals, and that kind of thing. Materials are, yes, first and foremost, they're the object of our study. So in foreign language learning, just the biggest way of looking at it, the object of your study is the language itself. So you need to have access to it, and you might want to change the language that you're learning. You might not be a good learner for a certain language, but a good learner for another language. But with a given language, what are the materials? The materials are the manuals or the textbooks, the didactically programmed materials first and foremost, the manuals and textbooks, the computer programs, the recordings that go with it, the grammars, reference books, dictionaries, first and foremost. It's also your teacher. And if you have access to native speakers, your conversation partners, the living in the country, not necessarily live conversation partners, but also books, other recorded books, broadcasts, music, film, all the things that you use to study the language, to get your sample of the language from. That's materials. And as I said, I've reviewed these kind of things, talked about these kind of things often before. And then the second one is methods. Methods, broadly speaking, are everything that you do, everything that is done to take the content of the materials and get it inside of you. To get it inside of you in such a way that hopefully you understand it first and foremost, and that you retain it. You retain it because you actually digest it, and it builds up and comes alive, and you're actually able to use it. So your methods are your study techniques. It's everything that your teacher does to help the exercises that he puts you through. It's the way you study yourself, whether you try to memorize word lists or you use flashcards with spaced repetition, or whether you learn vocabulary in context using bilingual texts. When you listen, do you just listen? Do you listen and repeat? Do you do pattern drills? Do you do shadowing? There are all sorts of different methods, and again, if you don't know of one and you learn a new one, you can perhaps make faster progress. So methods too are things that I have spoken about a great deal in the past. And methods and materials, they're very important. I mean, if you don't have the object of study, you obviously can't study it. Some materials are better than other materials, or at least better suited for you, and so it's important to have the right materials. But simply having the right materials, simply buying the best textbook or manual in itself is not going to do anything for you. You need to have the methods to use it, know the appropriate, most efficient methods for using the materials. But even that, I mean, if you know good study techniques and you have good materials, ultimately I think these are all crucial, all of these three M's, materials, methods, and motivation. But motivation is truly the key. That's what's going to make you use the methods and the materials. If you don't have it, you're not going to do it. So motivation is ultimately what is going to affect how much time and energy you put into your studies. And these, when all is said and done, this determines your success. How much time you put into your studies, how you divide your time, how much energy, how efficient your energy is, and all of this stems from motivation. Motivation is a huge topic, types of motivation and ways of perhaps increasing motivation that I haven't talked about that much, but I've spoken for just over half an hour now, so I think this might be a good time to break. And so next time, the topic or the theme will be motivation in foreign language learning.